How can Jews be occupiers and colonizers when they were there first? How can they steal land that is theirs? This is a frequently asked question among many people that are sincere in their question. They're not discrediting anyone, they simply want to know the answer. It is a pretty straightforward question, so I will do my best to give a pretty straightforward answer to this question. I was here first is a statement you will hear Zionist Jews make. The Jews always had the option to come to Palestine as inhabitants. That simply means that they had the option to come to Palestine and buy land from the locals or build homes where no one else was living. However, instead, they chose to come as settler colonizers. And what does that mean? The Jews used to live mainly in Europe and later on in the United States. Their history of settler colonialism starts with the Zionist movement sending colonizers to Palestine in the 1880s. Initially, they actually bought land legally, but the longer they would stay there, and the more the Zionist organization would send to Palestine, they stopped buying land, and instead they pillaged, threatened, harassed, and forcibly removed Palestinians from their homes, ironically always stating, "We were here first," when they had actually spent about 2,000 years in Europe and had just arrived to Palestine. Another problem that came with Zionism is one of its core principles, which states that they require an exclusive Jewish state. So, they come to a region where the clear majority of the locals, 97% to be correct, were Palestinians, and 3% were Jews. And how do I know this? Because at that time, before the Zionist movement started to send settlers to Palestine, the Ottoman Empire had sovereignty over there, and they had counted the population to about 500,000 inhabitants. And again, 97% of them were Arab Palestinians. So let's get back to the original thought. They came to a region where the clear majority of the locals, 97%, were Arabs, and there they wanted to establish an exclusive Jewish state. The only way for them to ensure a Jewish majority was to lower the count of the Palestinian population by killing them and expelling them. 750,000 Palestinians would disappear from the region that would become Israel right before the Israeli state was established. 750,000 Palestinians would disappear from that region. And 500 villages were completely destroyed and burnt up. On that land, where Palestinians had just lived, the Zionists built their own homes. They built new villages, and they established their own state. And that is why it is considered stolen land, that Israel is built on stolen land. And this is the playbook for settler colonialism. I want to give an example to show the difference between classic colonialism and settler colonialism, just to make this crystal clear. Imagine a table with chairs around it and people sitting on those chairs. A classic colonizer looks at the table and says, "Ooh, I want that to be mine. I love that table, and I will make it mine. And look, there are people here too. That's great. That's perfect for me. That means that I'll get more people to pay me taxes, and the more they are, the more labor force I will have. So he takes that table, and everyone sitting around that table now belongs to him. If they protest and say, like, we don't know you, why should I obey you? Why should I work for you? They will be told that the reason is because they no longer own the table. And if they still want to be able to sit around the table, they better obey. Let's take a look at what a settler colonizer does to that table. He sees it, he loves it, and he wants it. But then he takes a look around the table and sees that other people are sitting there, and he doesn't like it. So he approaches them and he tells them, leave. When they protest, he starts to harass them and threaten them. And if they still refuse to leave, he kills them. The ones that actually do leave, he will make sure to burn up their chairs just to make sure that they have nothing to return to. And when the table is empty, he takes his place. Then there's a third option. You see a table that you really love, and oh my God, you just want to sit there. And you see that others are already sitting there too. So what do? This is what you do. You take your own chair and you put it next to the table. And you take your place, not anyone else's place. You take your place at the table and you sit next to the others, because guess what? You're the new one around that table. The first example shows how Great Britain operated as a colonial power. The second example shows how the Europeans operated when they came to Australia, how Europeans operated when they came to the Americas, and how Europeans operated when they came to Palestine. And the third option shows how you can move to a new place like a normal and decent person. Wherever you live, you who are listening to this, wherever you live, it would be a criminal act to forcibly remove someone out of their home, to claim that home as yours. And if the original inhabitants of that home didn't leave, you burn their place down. Because then, at least you can have their land to build yourself a nice little house there. Would it matter in court if you said, but I have the right to harass them, threaten them, steal their land, because 2,000 years ago, maybe my specific ancestor was here? You know the answer to this question. Also, consider this fact. During the 1800s in Europe, the Jews would endure one of the harshest times of their history in what is known as the pogroms. This is persecution directly targeting the Jewish population. Part of the pogroms was that Jews lost their homes, among many, many horrible things. Why did the Europeans commit those crimes against them? Because they did not consider them to be Europeans, to be indigenous to Europe. They didn't see them as equals. And of course the Jews had the right to claim their home as much as any European. However, the solution to the pogroms that was happening in Europe, the solution to this problem, the Zionist movement started sending Zionist settlers from Europe to do exactly the same towards the Palestinians. We don't consider you indigenous, so I'm going to take your home and your land, among many other crimes they would commit against the Palestinians that actually were there before the colonizers were there. Because here's the thing. These people that state we were here first were not there first. They were in the United States or most likely in Europe. Their grandparents were most likely born in either one of these places. The ones who were there were the population I was talking about earlier, that was counted, that were part of the locals. They were the locals, and that was the 97% of the Palestinians and the 3% of the Jewish people that lived there before the colonization began. These are considered to be locals. There are Palestinians that are older than the Israeli state and that were driven away from their homes. And they're being told by Zionist Jews, I was here before you were. They are the ones who can shake their heads and say, actually, no, I was here before you were here. Is this their land? Yes. The Jews have always had a representation in Palestine. Is it only their land? No, not even a little bit. The Palestinians have been there long enough for them to have as strong a moral ground to stand on to claim that land as theirs too. And by the way, that applies to all of the land, not the bits and pieces of it that the Zionists believe to have graciously sacrificed for the Palestinians to be in today. Zionist Jews make it seem like their way of taking the place in Palestine was the only way of doing it, and they will defend it. It's like they've forgotten that they had another option, and that was to simply move to Palestine. And if they had the means for it, then they could have bought land, bought a house. And if they didn't have the means for it, they could have rented one. You know, like the rest of us do when we want to move to another country for whatever reason. But you decide for yourself if you think that what the Zionist settlers did would be a legal thing to do where you live. Is it even a decent thing to do where you live? Did the Europeans have the right to commit the same type of crimes against the Jews? And does the ones that were driven away from their homes, had their homes, land, financial security, a national identity stolen from them, do they have the right to resist the newcomers? This is Kofie. Thank you for listening.